The Kremlin has publicly snapped at Erdogan.
In Turkey, they train militants, all this, and took Aleppo. So who are they? And whose side are they on?
Lavrov changed the rhetoric about negotiations.
We are ready for negotiations, with the understanding that they will be conducted on the basis of the legitimate interests of each country.
Putin ordered to prepare for victory in the special operation.
Officials were told that the completion of the special operation with any outcome should be perceived by society as a victory.
This is what we are not only talking about further, but first I ask you to like and subscribe to this channel. It's just really interesting here. Let's go.
Turkey. They went to a rally, held a rally, went home, went to bed, prepared militants, that's it. With their protection, they have now come in, taken Aleppo. That's why. You can all think carefully for yourself and decide. So who are they and whose side are they on?
After the pro-Turkish rebels began to throw Russia out of Syria, for the first time the Kremlin made an open, public, aggressive attack in the direction of Erdogan, a dear friend and staunch ally. For the role of the one who voices this thesis, like Recep, who are you going to be? Selected the scapegoat Abti Alordinov, despite the fact that, yes, this character has already become an internet meme since the beginning of the Kursk operation in the armed forces of Ukraine. Alordinov is the official representative of Putin's Ministry of Defense. That is, all his words are perceived as official statements from this department. And now, as we understood, the Russian Ministry of Defense, after a real disgrace in Syria, just decided to wave its fists after the fight and try to sort things out with Erdogan somewhere. But only here there is a nuance. No one sorts things out with the weak. The weak is simply shown a place where they should sit and not wilt. And Putin in Syria showed himself exactly that. Think about it, so much time to fight, so much money to spend on the war in Syria, in order in a couple of days to lose everything. Just look at this disgrace. They even urgently withdrew their fleet from Syria so that, God forbid, it would not sink. The armed forces of Ukraine have probably already destroyed a sufficient number of ships. Grandpa probably doesn't want this anymore.
Russia has begun withdrawing ships from a naval base in Syria's Tartus after a rapid advance in Syria by Islamist rebels who have been unable to contain Assad's army. In total, the Russian naval group in Syria has 5 ships and 1 submarine. These include 2 Admiral Gorshkov-class frigates, 1 Admiral Grigorovich-class frigate, an improved Kilo-class submarine and 2 support vessels. There is a real possibility that the withdrawal is related to the deteriorating situation in Syria, the naval analyst wrote.
What is this if not the victory of the bunker multi-move? Seriously? It is also important to note here that Alordinov, that is, the Russian Ministry of Defense, is not the only structure that has now turned on the Turkish president. In the list of those who began to howl about a new blow to the flabby back, there is another character. This is the deputy of the State Duma of the Russian Federation, Gurylev, who is also an official in Russia. An alcoholic general, yes, but still this is an official. Just listen to what he says about Recep.
The aggravation in the Syrian Arab Republic is another attempt to stick a knife in our backs. Not in our rear, but, frankly, they're in our zone of interest. What began there today will definitely not stop tomorrow. We must understand that there will be an escalation in the Syrian Arab Republic, and in the Middle East in general.
Another knife in the back. Turkey, whose side are you on? How could you? Propagandists, officials, and other clowns like Alordinov are shouting. Everything is really simple here because there is a very natural chain here, which can be built on the basis of the events of recent months. For example, there was a BRICS summit in Kazan. Erdogan arrived there. Erdogan gave Putin his documents on the peaceful settlement of the Russian war against Ukraine there. What Putin told reporters after this summit. The Turkish Foreign Ministry said that peace should be within the framework of the territorial integrity of Ukraine, that Crimea should be in Ukraine, Putin should return it to Ukraine. So, it is quite likely that these documents of Erdogan were spelled out specifically about the return of Crimea to Ukraine and about the sovereignty of Ukraine. Logically, Putin did not like all this. They, by the way, publicly rejected Recep's proposal at the official level. And Recep looked at it all and said, "Oh, well, don't you understand in a good way? Okay, then hold Syria, we'll talk later." That is, everything is interconnected. The media write that the rebels' offensive in Syria risks dragging Turkey into a conflict with Russia. But to be honest, I fundamentally disagree with this. Now I will tell you why, but first I suggest listening to something in this context. Simply, Putin's experts and the same propagandists have already begun to threaten Turkey with war.
The Republic of Turkey, like many players, has sore points, especially regarding Russia. It overlooked the Russian factor, as seen with the downing of a Russian plane and the resulting difficulties. At the moment, Russian-Turkish relations are in a manageable environment from the point of view of political, economic, and security. But Turkey again decided to step on the same rake and play all in. But they understand that the Americans will not support them. And if anyone will support Turkey's actions in this direction, it is more likely to be Israel, and here are very unlikely points of contact. And the Americans themselves, they have a contingent there. It is small, it is still illegally occupying part of Syria. By the way, let me remind you that the Turks are also not very legally in Syria. And brilliant for our listeners, viewers, let me remind you, was Erdogan's explanation of what they are doing there. They are there at the invitation of the people of Syria. An interesting interpretation to document, learn, and view every event as an invitation from people. What do we do in Çeşme? Where did our ship anchor in Çeşme Bay from? We are invited by the Turkish people.
The propagandist recalled this for the Battle of Çeşme in 1770, when the Russian fleet defeated the Turkish. But there are two nuances right away. What a powerful fleet Putin's Russia has now was shown by the drones of the armed forces of Ukraine. Greetings to the cruiser Moskva. And the flight of his fleet from Syria is a vivid example of this. The second point, I want to note that Russian propagandists whine that they did not expect such events, that they were deceived again, a knife in the back. But wait, Putin himself killed Prigozhin and gave the Syrian project to the Ministry of Defense. That is, Putin himself initiated the current events. What they fought for, they ran into. When the regime of Syrian dictator Bashar al-Assad falls and everything is now heading towards it, Moscow's influence in the Middle East will weaken. And it is this, by the way, that may become a harbinger of the collapse of the political regime in Russia. Because the elites will see it all. In fact, they see it now. And they will draw their own conclusions. Why do you think Lavrov suddenly got out against the backdrop of a resounding defeat in Syria and started talking about negotiations with Ukraine? More precisely, he did not even speak, he was begging for negotiations. He even changed his rhetoric. The stallion forgot about Putin's ultimatum in June when the Russian dictator, I recall, told Ukraine to voluntarily surrender 4 regions and reduce the size of the armed forces of Ukraine, including to abandon NATO. Now Lavrov simply says that the negotiations should take into account the interests of the two sides and not only Russia, as it was before.
That was their position. Not a word about Ukraine without Ukraine, and the fact that they have been discussing Russia without Russia for more than 2 years within the framework of the Zelensky formula, this does not occur to anyone. And we are ready for honest negotiations, as President Putin said. He, however, advised Zelensky's bosses to first force him to cancel the decree that prohibits negotiations with Putin's government. But we are ready for negotiations with the understanding that they will be kept on the basis of legal accounting, every comprehensive accounting for the legitimate interests of each country.
That is, the Kremlin, it turns out, is offended by the fact that the West talks about Russia without Russia. See, that's what it's all about. As if Scholz recently called Putin, Trump probably also spoke with him. Zelensky said that Russia, in fact, is invited to the Second Peace Summit. Where do they talk about Russia without Russia? They are just talking to her now from a position of strength. And it is somehow inconvenient for the Kremlin to admit this. As I said yesterday, I repeat. Putin's is cracking on all sides. Geopolitics has completely failed. Look, Moldova is a failure, Abkhazia is a failure, Armenia is a failure. Georgia, mass protests, also a failure. Instability, escalation. Syria, failure. And these are only the events of recent months. By the way, in addition to such sore points as Syria and Georgia, Belarus can be added quite realistically, where soon, I recall, the next so-called presidential elections. The simple fact is that the protest potential in the Union Putin state has not disappeared, and the majority hates Lukashenko with all their hearts. You will agree, everything went heapily. And Putin? And what about Putin? And Putin is silent again. Putin ignores all problems. The Russian Foreign Ministry, the Kremlin literally failed its work from the CIS countries to the very outskirts. Russia is literally on the brink of major turmoil, let's call it that. And the grandfather is talking about the fate of spermatozoa.
It's a misconception that everyone thinks that sperm know where to swim.
What?
Sperm know where to swim. It's not true.
Sorry, I haven't heard about this. Repeat again.
Sperm know where to swim. Everyone thinks so. It's not true. They don't know. Those swimming in the right direction still fertilize around the 100th. It's the same in science. We are exploring without a clear direction. Many people swim the opposite way.
They know or don't know, but they swim where they need to. This is the most important thing.
These are the ones that we will learn about.
There are no other things to do, by God. Seriously, the Kremlin is now actively preparing the ground for how they can end their so-called special operation and sell it for victory to their people. Just recently, at a seminar for vice governors, which was organized by the Putin administration, officials were told that the completion of the special operation with any outcome should be perceived by society as a victory. Like, work, officials, and speak in such a way that everyone believes.
At a seminar for vice governors organized by the presidential administration, officials were told that the completion of the special operation with any outcome should be perceived by society as a victory. Although the image of the so-called victory, which should be guided by, looks suspiciously like the peace plan of the Trump team and Ukraine's conditions for negotiations with Russia. More than half of Russians already support the idea of stopping the special operation. Everyone has got tired of it. Volunteers who were lured by million-dollar contracts are running out. The refrigerator wins over the TV. It does not matter how the end of the so-called special operation will be presented to the citizens of Russia. If only the Kremlin would console itself with the word victory.
But do not confuse, Putin planned everything this way because everything is clear, according to plan and strictly in accordance with the schedule.